But good afternoon and many thanks for the opportunity to speak to you here today. A warm welcome to those of you sitting in front of me in the State Library Reading Room and for those of you attending via the webinar. A particular hello to those of you who are watching this through a webinar at various screenings at Libraries Tasmania libraries around the state. Firstly, I'd like to start with Libraries Tasmania's acknowledgement of the Tasmanian Aboriginal peoples and country. As I read this acknowledgement today, I reflect on the enormous impact that European settlement and colonisation had on the home places, the family places and other places significant to the Tasmanian Aboriginal people. Libraries Tasmania recognises the deep histories and cultures of the Aboriginal people of Lutruwita, Tasmania. We acknowledge Tasmanian Aboriginal people as a traditional and continuing custodians of the land, waters and sky. We pay respect to the elders past and present who hold the memories, traditions, culture and knowledge of country. We extend our respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples whose countries were never ceded. So my name is Alicia Marchant and I'm an archivist here in the State Library and Archive Service within Libraries Tasmania. And while it's me presenting this talk here today, the content and research was very much a team effort. In the team we have Bev, who I've just lost, she's just there, Bev and Greta, who's next to her, Clifford, who's running the webinar, Andrea, who's behind there, Rose, who isn't actually here, and also Matthew, who I think might be retrieving items at the moment. Each of these individuals have made a major contribution and I wanted to start this talk by recognising them and by thanking them. I'm going to speak for about 40 minutes or so and then the team will come up here and will answer any questions that you might have. I will also mention that down the track we are planning workshops on researching your house and home, so do stay tuned for these. So what are we going to cover here today? So this talk aims at providing you with the research tools to explore the history of your house or a house or place of significance to you. We'll demonstrate how you can find more about the history of your home or a property or a building or place from the past that has captured your interest, perhaps because it has significance to your family history and heritage. We will explore some of the wonderful records that we have in the Tasmanian Archive and State Library collection that you can use to research a house and home. We'll show you how you can use a range of sources, including historic photographs and films, newspapers, maps, directories and house plans to reveal rich insight into the structural history and architecture of a particular building, as well as the varied lives of its inhabitants. Learn how to find out about how a property looked in the past and how it may have changed, research past owners and occupiers and discover the origins and significance of the places and communities in the surrounding regions. What we want you to take away from today's talk is a greater knowledge and insight into the process of researching your house and home, and we hope to spark your interest and encourage you to pursue a range of research possibilities in exploring the rich social history of houses. Today we will share with you several research journeys that the State Library and Archive Service team have been on to create the new display, which is behind me there, which we've called If Walls Could Talk, Researching the Stories and Histories of Tasmanian Buildings. So for those of you here in person, we'd like to invite you to view the current display afterwards and some other reference items that we have on the table around us as well. And for those of you watching on the webinar or later on the YouTube clip, don't worry because some of the items that we have are available as digital resources as well, including a Flickr album of images, and I will refer to these as I go along. So one case study that we'll be referring to throughout this talk is that of Rose's house, which is one of the research centre points of our display. Now, Rose is a valued member of the State Library and Archives team who has been researching the history of her house for many years, and we're extremely grateful to Rose for sharing her research with us. So Rose's house is at 60 Duke Street, Sandy Bay in Hobart, and as we'll discover, a well-known Tasmanian and international celebrity lived at her house, albeit for a fairly brief time. Seemed to have moved around a bit. I think you all know who I mean. So this is a fantastic case study that shows what can be done with the resources that are available in the Tasmanian Archives and the State Library collections. So I wanted to start by reflecting on why research your house and home. Why is this such an important topic? Apart from the fact that it is just really good fun, there are really lots of specific reasons and outcomes that result from researching the histories and stories of houses. Firstly then, perhaps you want to know more about your house for practical reasons, to understand the structural layering of a house in order to renovate it or restore it to evoke a particular time period and architectural style. Knowing more about your house's layout, date of construction, how the structure evolved over time and its architectural style is therefore critical to this process of understanding the structure. Secondly, there is a desire to know who has lived in my house before me. Researching a house and home is about exploring the layering of people who've had effect on the house, because homes are imbued with memories and these shape our homes. The sorts of questions that you could potentially answer on your research journey include who planted the apple tree in the yard, who put the wallpaper in the lounge room. Such knowledge is so important in so many ways, but particularly in stamping individuality and ownership onto a house when you've just moved into it. It's as if knowing what the past was like can help shape the future of this house. So thirdly, perhaps some of you are interested in adding to your own family story. Have you discovered where an ancestor grew up in Tasmania and wish to find out more about how and where they lived? Underlying this question is the desire to situate and place your ancestors, to know more about where they lived, what the suburb was like, the local school, the local church, the local park where children may well have played. Understanding where someone lived in the past brings you closer to them, or at least feels like it brings you closer to them, to where they lived, and perhaps closer to understanding their everyday lives. So because this subject here today is so extremely enormous, I have separated it into two intersecting parts, researching your house and researching your home. And what I've done here is I've used the term house to refer to the physical structure of a house, and I've used the term home to refer to the people, families and stories that make a house more than just a structure. So these are the sorts of things that we're going to cover today. So part one, we'll be looking at house plans, how you access them. So council plans, public works department, and then looking at photographs and films, then wider backgrounds, so looking at the histories of suburbs, how you can research changes in in street numbers, and actually also in the names of streets sometimes too. Architectural resources that we have here, and then land grants, but only in passing. And I'll be talking here about certificates of title, really primarily, nothing else, because we have other land grant information. The second half is going to be looking at the names index, early directories, post office directories, assessment and valuation roles, and then the absolute goldmine of the Tasmanian newspapers. Now, don't panic, because you may have noticed from the enormity of the sections that we're going to be covering here today that this talk will unavoidably be a bombardment of information, because there are just so many, simply so many wonderful research avenues for you to explore. However, we have two key research guides, one of which you have been given out as a handout, that were wonderful, written by the very wonderful Rita, who's here with us today, that contain the primary resources and links that I will be presenting here today. So don't panic, in other words. So the first guide that you have is researching a building's history, and that has lots of wonderful material in it. And the second main key guide for today is also where someone lived in Tasmania. So these are available in the Libraries Tasmania in the catalogue, in the Guides to Records section, which if you go to the homepage of Libraries Tasmania, you'll get a little tile system there, and it's the bottom middle one there, which is the Guides to Records. And we have a full list of, I've just taken a screenshot there of the sorts of material that we do cover in these Guides to Records, which are really useful and really extensive as well. I'll be referring to a couple of these as we go along, not just the building guide and where someone lived guide. So let's get cracking. So council plans. Now, the Tasmanian Archives hold many house plans within our collection, and these house plans have come into the collection because they have been submitted to a local council to gain approval to make changes to a building. The councils have then submitted these plans to archives. Now, mostly the plans in our collection focus on additions and alterations to existing structures rather than on the construction of the original building. Generally, the plans in the Tasmanian Archives collections date from around or after the year 1900, and depending on the particular council, that depends on what date the end date is of that particular council. The most recent plans are usually retained by the local council, so you do need to contact them for any more recent plans. It is interesting to note that not all building plans have survived, as it was not a legal requirement for councils to keep them and to archive them until recently. So the Tasmanian Archive collection includes, but is certainly not limited to, the council areas of Hobart, Glenorchy, Launceston, Devonport, Clarence and Kingra. Those are our really main areas. Now, other building plans may be held by your council, so it's worth contacting them, as I mentioned. Now, I've separated these particular councils into 3 groups here for discussion. Group 1 is Hobart, Glenorchy and Launceston. Now, Hobart plans, we hold just over 34,000 building applications for Hobart, and the main series there is AE 417. These applications cover the years from 1919 to 1990, and records in this series, when you order them, they come in a little sort of yellow envelope, which can contain a range of items within this envelope, including building surveyor's office documents, forms showing details of building work, address, name of owner, name of builder and fee payment. Often, but not always, a plan of the proposed work is included, which may range from a rough sketch to hand-coloured architectural design plan. And it's interesting to note that sometimes we have applications that may not have actually continued on, they may not have been approved as well. So for Glenorchy, the Glenorchy planning application, the main series is AE 819, and this covers the years from 1900 to 1985. Included within this record are applications for permission to carry out building works. It includes the applicant's name and address and the builder's details. Building plans are very often included in this. Now, just as a very quick aside, for these 2 councils of Hobart and Glenorchy, another really useful resource are drainage maps and plans, which we have in the collection. Includes the Metropolitan Drainage Board maps, which were published between 1905 and 1909. And these are really useful for central Hobart properties from North Hobart to Battery Point and westwards to South Hobart, as well as Newtown and Queenborough. Now, these maps are available through our library catalogue, and they show outlines of buildings with floor plans, often in feet, well, always in feet, name major buildings and can include names of street numbers as well, as they were around 1910. So in Glenorchy too, they have the Glenorchy Drainage Plan Register, which covers Glenorchy from 1942 to 1970. Now, unfortunately, the plans don't actually exist anymore. However, the register does, and the registers detail the owner, property, date of contract, and are really useful for dating buildings in this area. Just returning back to our first group, Launceston. So for Launceston, the main series is LCC 26, which covers 1941 to 1966. And this includes property files, building applications for the former Lilydale Municipal Council as well, which amalgamated with Launceston City Council in 1985. So it's important to remember that sometimes council boundaries change over time and some merge so that this current council may actually be different from that in the past. So for instance, I had a quick look and found that Esperance Municipal Council, which is of course right down sort of Dover area, it was amalgamated with other wards to create the Huon Valley Council at a later date, but we still do have some of those building applications and they exist under the Esperance Municipal Council rather than the Huon Valley Council. So you can see that with this particular one, which is just a screenshot of that particular series that down the bottom are the items, and that they're arranged according to very rough locations and then the names of the people that put in the application. So for those of you interested in Launceston Council plans, you're in great luck, because there's a wonderful published resource that you can look at, which is called Launceston Properties and Country Properties, A Guide to Research. And this is a really extensive thing. It's digitised and available online through our library catalogue. Really wonderful resource. So how do you access these plans from Hobart, Glenorchy and Launceston? Well, this group of three is by far the easiest to locate, as they are arranged in the library's Tasmania catalogue according to the address. So all you need to do is, in the library's Tasmania website, is to put in an example. So I've put in 60 Duke there in this little search engine. I've also made sure that I've clicked the tab Tasmanian Archives tab. And then we also recommend that you don't put street or road or avenue in, that you actually just put in the name of the street. And this is what's come up. So that first one there is actually a plan of Rose's house. It's from 1985, and it's for alterations to the existing property that went through the Hobart City Council. So we can order that and view it in the history room. So yes, I've just jumped the gun there, but how do you access these plans? So these plans are in hard copy and they are largely not digitised. Plans can be ordered. So down, if I was to click on that particular item, the individual register will come up. Down the bottom we'll have a little link that says order to use in person in the history room, and you click on that link and you can order it, and it will come through to the history room, which is behind me here. Alternatively, if you're unable to come to the history room, then you can order copies via our coppering service, which at a cost, but we do recommend that you look at them first, just in case these plans aren't actually what you want. So coming to our second group then, this includes Clarence and Kingborough councils. So Clarence, the main series is AD 971, which covers building applications from 1941 to 1988. However, our records are quite incomplete with this series. So the series contains applications, reports, plans, and also associated correspondence. With Kingborough, the main series for Kingborough is AC 398, and this covers the years 1947 to 1975 and includes Bruny Island as well. Now, to search for plans in the councils of Kingborough or Clarence, you actually do need to contact the council to obtain a building planning number, and then you can come back and put that planning number. So find the right one, the number within the correct series. So, for instance, with Kingborough, if you looked in the AC 398 series and your plan was number 2000, then you find that number 2000, which is listed within that particular series. And there's always people here who can help you, and I'll talk more about how we can help you in other ways in just a moment. So other building plans may of course be held by your council. Coming to our final little group, which is just a little case study of Devonport actually. And the main series of Devonport is AF 500, which covers 1937 to 75, and there are 11,000 of these particular ones in this series. So in order to access this series, you have to first go to a register, which is AF 503, and from the register you obtain a building application number, which you then can look through. And the wonderful thing about the Devonport one, which is why I also use it as a case study, is that they are actually digitized, which is really interesting. So what I decided to do is I randomly selected number 33 in this series, which was AF 500-133, and it's a 3-page application to build a porch on an existing property on the Esplanade in East Devonport by a Mr. Black, Mr. F.J. Black. Now this one made me giggle because the application is for a porch, and the line which has they're intended for use as a porch, which I think is just lovely. So there are some really interesting things that you can just delve in and have a look at these historic applications. I randomly selected another one too, and with this one, it's actually an application for a new dwelling by Mr. L.F. Nielsen in 1938 on Sprayton Road in Devonport. And I went on a little research deviation here, which I often do, and thought I would see if there were any other records that I could find on this gentleman, Mr. Nielsen. So what I did is I placed his name into our names index, which we'll cover in just a moment, but I wanted to just show you the sorts of things that you can really do when you find out somebody's name. And what I did do is I found I found his will, which is digitised and available through our names index. And this will states that he actually died at his house in Sprayton Road. So obviously the one that he built, he died in this house. That his brother, who was his executor, lived on the same street that he did, in Sprayton Road as well. And it also says that Mr. Nielsen was a waterside worker. So these are the sorts of things we can really get a picture of someone through researching the property, through the simple thing as a plan, and you can expand out in all sorts of wonderful ways. The other record that's on the right there shows that Mr. Nielsen actually served in World War I, and he received some land in Penguin as part of the soldier settlement scheme. So that just came up in my general searches. So coming to our second lot, I've actually jumped the gun there, but Public Works Department. So some of you here today or watching might be interested in researching houses that were originally built for other uses and purposes. For instance, maybe the house you were interested in was formerly a police station or a post office or a school building. If your house was previously a post office, customs house, defence building, railway building, or even a lighthouse, if you were really lucky, then these are Commonwealth buildings, and you will find information and possibly plans and other resources too with the colleagues in the National Archives. So last year, our colleague in the National Archives, Bruce Kay, delivered a wonderful talk for Family History Month on prominent and obscured land and buildings in the National Archives. And what I've done there is just given a snippet of our YouTube page, which I recommend. There's lots of wonderful things on our YouTube page. And Bruce's one is just the third one down there. So you can watch that from last year, and it was really entertaining. So buildings that were built by the state included police stations, courthouses, jails, government offices, hospitals, schools, accommodations, and some early railway buildings. And for plans and information about these sorts of buildings, you need to look at the records of the Public Works Department, who were responsible for the construction and maintenance of public buildings and infrastructure from 1835 to 1977, sorry. Now, there are over 160 individual series within the Public Works Department, but the main record really, the main series I should say, is PWD 266. This is a series of plans of public buildings and infrastructure, and they cover a range of different things: hospitals, schools, bridges and jetties, which I don't think anyone would live in, but you never know. And they cover between 1834 right up to 1995. Now, these plans within this particular series can be found by searching for the name of the building as they were individually described on the catalogue. A majority of them are actually available as aperture cards in our microspace, which is in one of the rooms just behind me that you walk through to get to the history room. And some of them are digitised and available online. For instance, this one here that I've got as an example, which is the old Queen Alexandra Hospital in Battery Point. And this hospital was converted to apartments fairly recently. And the plans for this hospital were located in this particular series and no doubt would have been of great use to the architects during this conversion. So moving on to our next lot of photographs and films. Our next category, which is photographs and films. And these resources can be absolute gold mines of information. Within the State Library and Tasmanian Archive collection, we have the most fantastic collection of historical photographs, plus also paintings and drawings. There are literally thousands of images relating to buildings and homes, and we're adding to these all the time, so you do need to keep checking through our program of digitisation. Photographs are wonderful for researching your house and can include streetscape images, aerial photographs, panoramas, albums and postcards of particular towns. In particular, they are fabulous for gaining a general overview of a suburb, which I'll speak more about in just a moment. So how can you locate images within our collection? So all you need to do is actually to search for the name of the street, making sure that you're in that Tasmanian Archive tab. And you can limit your formats. On the left-hand side, there is a margin with a menu, and you can click on format, and you can click on photographs or prints or online. And so you can limit the searches because there are so many thousands of photos that come up. Limit that if you only want to have digitised photos. So, for instance, I put in Channel Highway into the search box and was surprised to see a section of road near where I live with now demolished shops. This one is from around 1960, and my house is on the hill above and would probably have only just been built, perhaps. So it's worth noting that not all images have been digitised, and in this instance you'll need to order to view them in the history room, or you can order copies through our copying service too. In our Building History Guide to Records, Greta has listed many different series of photographs that might be of interest to you, and I won't go through them all. I encourage you to have a look at your guide yourself and have an explore too what ones that Greta has highlighted. But I want to just highlight to you 3 different ones which I think are a particular wonderful resource. The first is an album of photographs with plans and sketches that were designed by Bernard Ridley Walker, who was an architect. He was born in 1884, trained in Hobart Technical College before working in London. And what we have is an album which has the most beautiful pictures. What I love about it is that it has the finished product as well as the actual designs in it, and the interiors too, which is really unique. So even if this house isn't your house or it's not one you're interested in, it's about also the features, the architectural features and the particular bits of the interior too that you might be interested in researching, providing context to your own research. And there's just another one there of a house that was in Ouse. So this album covers from 1914 to 1941 and is really quite an extraordinary collection to have in our archives. Another series of photographs which you might like to have an explore of are the Cecil Percy Ray photographs. Those of you in the building here today would have walked past a selection of those in the stairwell coming up. These were taken by Cecil Ray in about 1900 and 1920. He was really interested in photographing just various house styles that existed in early 20th century Tasmania. So they are basically, it's like a catalogue of the different house styles within this period, and are really very fascinating. And often we don't actually have the location for these, so it's more about the sort of style and the materials that are being used too. So this one is a brick construction, the one before that was a weatherboard one. There's houses of stone, and it's just really interesting in seeing how in the 1920s the sort of styles that were still there that have been built upon from earlier as well. So Cecil Ray was actually a Mercury, he worked for the Mercury newspaper and was a really keen photographer. So this is a really unique collection of building photographs, unique within Australia. So the third lot of interesting photographs I want to highlight for you are the aerials, which are extremely useful, and also yes, there are more than 900 aerial photographs within our collection, which you will find by searching the Tasmanian Archives using the keyword aerial, and then we recommend that you use the location that you're interested in, like Sandy Bay. So this one is of Hobart, for instance, Sandy Bay, or this one which is of Oatlands. I absolutely love this one because you can still see the biplane. The biplane's on the right-hand side. They captured that when they were capturing Oatlands as well. And it's quite late. It's from 1956, and they're still using the biplane to do the photography. So there's one series of aerials that are particularly fabulous, were produced by the teaching aides for use in classrooms, and that's the AB713 series, which includes this photograph and the prior one of Hobart as well. So another series of fabulous aerials that were produced in 1922 are that of Launceston. They surveyed the city of Launceston, and there's a whole series of these too, which are really wonderful for seeing exactly how things are laid out, whether a house was built on the property or not. There are just so many uses for the aerials in general, rather than just also them being really quite beautiful and really interesting. Yes, house streets were arranged at different time periods when particular suburbs were extended into and were built up. Now, if you are interested in photographs, then we do have the State Library and Archives Service Flickr album, which is available just through our website, and we add to these all the time. Whenever we have a display, we usually create an album, and the top one on the left is our current album at the moment for our display, If Walls Could Talk. So we do try to put as many images in there as we possibly can. So those of you watching online, then you can jump on our Flickr album and see some of these images as well. Now, it's also worth noting that we have an extensive collection of films that may have vision of the street or house that you are interested in. Sometimes these might be in passing, but nonetheless, they can be really very informative as well. And you can search our film collection using keywords such as the names of the various town of places, or limiting your search to just films using that drop-down menu. You might also like to look at our YouTube channel, where we have many wonderful films. The ones of interest particularly that you might like are Hobart Island Capital from 1965. There's another one called Georgian Bothwell from 1964. A 1957 one called The City of Launceston, or just the fourth one I'll mention, which is Remembering the 1967 Bushfires, which really does have a bit of a panorama of those areas which were affected by those fires before and after. So turning now to thinking about the wider history and background of suburbs, towns and districts, we cannot emphasise enough how important and valuable it is to research the broader suburb, town and district in which your house is located. Exploring the history of your building's locality will help you understand how your house fits within that wider picture, provides a general sense of place and sense of community. Now, although this might be extremely obvious, it is one that is sometimes forgotten about, but it is really important to speak to previous owners and neighbours and local history organisations to gather knowledge on your house and in the area. Local history groups often have Facebook pages that you can join, meetings and other resources, and they're so important for the local knowledge that sometimes exists orally and that hasn't actually been written down at all. With your suburb, it's here too that it's really maps and plans are particularly useful for exploring early street names, structures and landmarks. So with Rose's house in Sandy Bay, as you can imagine, there are many maps that cover this area. This one that we've got here dates from the year 1900, and Duke Street, I can walk away from this. Yep. Duke Street is plotted there where Rose lives. It actually hasn't extended into her area yet, but it's really interesting to have a look at that and to see what actually is there at that particular time. We have guides to records that you can use on maps and plans. This has got wonderful resources in it. We're in the process of updating this, so it will be even better, but generally it's a really fantastic list of what you can, of the main sources that you can use to research your house and home through maps and plans. So we also have an amazing selection of local history publications in our collection. And for these, you can search the catalogue by using the word history and the location that you want. So history Taroona, history Hobart, and these will bring up a lot of different options for you that you can then refine depending on what it is you're actually looking for particularly. Heritage reviews in our collection are also a wonderful resource and shed light on aspects and themes that can help you understand the region and also historic, the buildings and structures around. So of particular note are the Street by Street publications on Hobart suburbs, which include studies on Newtown, South Hobart, Bellerive, amongst others. And here's a bit of a list of some other ones which we have some out on the table for you, but these are just some that you might like to get online and have a look at them. Sorry, these aren't digitised, but have a look at the different topics that you can then come in or go to your local library and research yourself as well. The Launceston Local Studies Collection is an extremely important collection of archival items which focus on northern Tasmania, and this is actually up in the Launceston Library. And Walsh's Tasmanian Almanac too, also known as the Red Books, include detailed annual information about Tasmania, including all the regions and towns, and provide a bit of a description of those regions and towns as well. These Welsh's almanacs are actually available just over here behind Lydia there, and so you can access them, but they're also available via Ancestry Library edition as well. So turning to changes in street numbers and also street names. So street names, house numbers, suburbs and other place names can change over time for a variety of reasons. And after the Local Government Act of 1906, when boundaries were redefined, many councils renumbered their streets. So this can cause a bit of an issue when you're trying to research a property. Streets can also be renumbered, sometimes several times, and for other reasons such as when houses when land was subdivided or a street was extended. If you're trying to solve a street numbering puzzle, then you have to do a bit of detective work backwards and forwards through the resources. But a good way to check this is to compare the position in relation to neighbours over different years. And also we have online, we have various street name changes, which we have listed. That's only the top couple of them. The list goes on. So you can research to see if your street has changed its name. And also Barry Campbell last year, actually over the last 2 years, has provided a wonderful Family History Month talk which talks about house histories, and that's available in our YouTube topic, and he really does tackle this problem of what do you do when your street has been renamed or your number, you can't find the number of your house as well. So I'd recommend looking at Barry Campbell's talks too on YouTube. So with the example of Rose's house, Duke Street was renamed in 1887. It was originally called Reed Street, and we can find that within that list that we have collated ourselves, but also we searched in Trove too, and we found that there was a whole lot of streets that were renamed at this point, including Rose's one. So yes, so that's how to tackle your street or number changes. And yes, you just have to be sort of a real detective about it. So moving on to our architectural resources, I'm only going to do this really quickly. So sometimes knowing the era that your house was built is really important to understanding its structural features. We have a really large range of secondary architectural resources in the State Library collection that you might like to consult. And also the National Trust, which is where I've taken these two pictures from. National Trust also has a wide range of different resources too, which are online, which are really useful. So just a couple of examples of books in the collection that you might find of interest, and I won't go over these, but it's something that, architecture, predominantly the secondary sources, or looking at primary sources as well within the collection to find similar things within the era that might have the same architectural style that you are after. Now, I want to get on to some really fantastic resources that we have, and these are the certificates of title. So some of you might be interested in researching who the first owners of the land on which your house or building sits, who owned the land first. Now, this is a question I'm only going to touch on really briefly because my lovely colleague Elizabeth Brown presented a talk last week on this entitled Finding the Old Family Farm Using Archival Records, and hopefully there'll be a workshop about this as well, so we'll do keep an eye out for that too, because Liz has presented some really wonderful information that she would like to build on as well. So we do have a land grants guide that I've brought up there that may help you find the first purchasers of the land. However, in this talk today, I just want to focus on the certificates of title. Certificates of title were records that prove the ownership of land, and in Tasmania, these are managed by the Land Titles Office. Certificates of title are extremely useful for researching a building's property's history. Within the Tasmanian Archives, certificates of title are held as Series AG 247. And there are several ways in which you locate a certificate within this series, and that depends very much on the year. To search by name of owner for a certificate of title between 1926 and 1972, you use the Land Titles Act Index Series AG 249, and this will provide you with a certificate of title reference number. If the property you want to research is earlier, from 1862 to 1926, and this just requires one extra step in this process. So firstly, you need to go to the Land Titles Act Indexes to Registrations AG 253, and then to the Land Titles Act Registers AG 252 for a certificate of title reference number. Gosh, that's a lot of series there. So we went on a wonderful research journey exploring the certificate of title for Rose's house, and the results were really quite fascinating. So this is just a list of the 5 that we have managed to find. There may actually be more as well, but these are the 5 main ones. Just to focus on, I'll be focusing on a couple of these, but this is what one of them looks like. We do also have these printed out in the one of the cabinets over here behind us here too. So in this particular one here, which is the first one from 1911, it has the name of Henry Charles Vaughan as being the person who owned this land. On the second page, so they're usually in 2 pages, front 1 and 2. So the one on the right-hand side there, it often has a list of the previous owners and then the new owners, which is extremely useful when you want to create a chain of ownership over a particular property. So on this second page, it has the mortgage transfer information, which is that chain of people, and on the 9th of June it says that this property then was passed to a lady by the name of Ida Schwann. It was then transferred, and I'll just go back to the list so that you can see that again. It was then transferred to a Carl Schwann in 1913 and then on to a Walter Alderman in May 1920. And we'll have a look at that, the title there. So that's what they look like, and they are actually quite easy to read, the handwriting. It's just not big enough on there for you to be able to see it very well. And then the last one that we have in this series of 5 was in 1964, when the certificate of title shows that there was a transfer to one Ivy Parry. Now, critically for researching family histories and tracing the owners of properties, the certificates of title provide you with a string of names of people who own the property. So for our research journey with Rose's house, this is really fantastic because we have multiple names that we have associated with 60 Duke Street. However, this information doesn't tell us at what date the house was actually built on a particular property. So when was the house built on 60 Duke Street? And this is a question I'll have to come back to in just a moment because I'm really excited to find all of these names and I want to know more about these people. So we'll return to that in just a moment. That question of when was the house actually built. So let's turn to the second part of this talk, which focuses on how you can research those who lived and were associated in this house. And you can see that I've brought out little snippets occasionally. It's not really a very defined thing, house and home. Obviously, people make houses and they make homes as well. So let's turn to this. Now, our names index, which is an online index that we have that's available through the Libraries Tasmania website, is the most fabulous resource which provides numerous records including birth and death records, health and welfare records and divorces. Many of these are digitised, which we'll have a look at a few in just a moment, but this is just an overview of the sorts of records that are actually included in our names index. I've just taken this from the website so you can go and read this a bit more clearly. It's a bit hard to see, I know, but it's just giving you an idea. So to search the names index, all you need to do is to put the name of the person who you want to find in the search box and make sure that you've clicked on the tab at the top. So with all those plans and things, you want the middle tab, which is the Tasmanian Archive tab. But right now we want the Names Index tab, which is highlighted in grey there. So put the name of the person in there and then press search. So I had lots of fun exploring several angles with regards to the people that we've highlighted through the certificates of title at 60 Duke Street. So the first thing I did was I thought, well, I would like to know more about Henry Charles Vaughan, who was the 1911 owner. So what I did is I put his name in and I found his birth register. So I can see that he was born in January 1868 in Battery Point, that his father was a shipwright. So that's very interesting knowledge, building up a picture of this individual who owned this property. He married in December 1904 at St George's Church, Battery Point. He married a Lily Garland, and they had 5 children registered over the following decade or so. Now, our names index has birth registers for their following children in their following years, and some of them have on them in the register an address. So we have, for instance, 1910, we have born High Street, Sandy Bay. Jumping down, we have 1915, born Parliament Street, and then again born Parliament Street, but we have 45 Parliament Street for 1918 one. In each of these different registers, their father, Henry Vaughan, is listed as being a carpenter and a builder as his occupation. So that's a really interesting thing to know as well about this particular individual with in relation to 60 Duke Street. Now, disappointingly, it would appear that none of the Vaughan children were born at 60 Duke Street. However, this is not surprising as the Vaughans owned the property for less than 1 year in 1911. However, this does build a wonderful picture of the various children associated with the property at 60 Duke Street and is a worthwhile exercise in itself. Another wonderful resource that comes up in the names index searches are Tasmanian wills, and wills are absolutely gold for tracing a property's history. So Henry Charles Vaughan's will has come up in my general names index search. He died in 1939, and his will names his family members and also lists the houses that he owned at the time of his death. So Henry's will shows that the family owned multiple properties on Parliament Street. In fact, he owned 5, was 43, 45, 46, 47 and 51 Parliament Streets. And these houses are each left to his wife and his children in his will. So while this will doesn't really reveal much solid information about 60 Duke Street as such, exploring these records does build up a really interesting picture of wider connections to the house and to the suburb more generally. So the second thing that I did with the names index is to do a general search using just the keyword Duke Street. And what I found were 43 birth and death records that have been registered with Duke Street as the location. Now, these didn't have a particular number associated with them, they were just generally registered as Duke Street. What this provides is a really fabulous overview of the people who lived and died in this particular street. Birth records are fabulous so that they have the name of the parents too, so you can work backwards, and death records are really interesting as well. Another thing that came up when I put Duke Street into the names index were a series of really unique photographs that for ticket holders for the Tasmanian exhibition of 1894 to 95. These tickets were for exhibitors and also attendees of the exhibition. And 3 of these come up of people having lived on Duke Street, Sandy Bay, and this one includes Miss Nimmo of Duke Street. And in fact, you can see in the one previously, it's possibly not very clear, but I think it's second from the top that we actually have a Nimmo there. So a death has occurred, and we can also connect up this particular family as living at a spot. So I think that's a really lovely story that's sort of creating, is coming out here. So yes, William Nimmo, who died in 1902. So that's the sort of thing that you can explore, really, just really simple names index searches. It can take you on all sorts of research avenues, which are just really fantastic. The next thing I'd like to talk about are the Tasmanian Post Office directories, which are the most fantastic resource, absolute gold for a variety of reasons. The Tasmanian Post Office directories cover the years from 1890 to 1948 and a searchable online resource which are usually arranged in 3 parts. They're arranged alphabetically by street for Hobart and Launceston and some larger towns such as Burnie. They're alphabetical lists of residents by town, and their alphabetical directory of both individual and businesses for all of Tasmania and trade and community directories. Now, these are digitised and are available through the Libraries Tasmania website. You can download them and they are fully searchable using keywords, which I do recommend that you do because names will pop up multiple times and that's really interesting. So looking at our case study of 60 Duke Street, we searched through directories from the year 1900. However, we found that number 60 was just not listed in these particular lists. So, for instance, I've put up here 1912, when we know from the certificates that Edith Swan owned the property of number 60. However, that's just not listed in the number 60, just doesn't have an entry there at all. So this has led us to believe that there probably was no house built on number 60 at this particular time because there's no one registered as sort of in the more popular ways of contacting people. So we wondered whether then perhaps because we'd been on a research journey, we know that Henry Warren was a carpenter builder, so maybe he may have actually purchased 60 Duke Street in 1911 with the intention of building on it. We just don't know. It's really lovely to surmise this, but given that he built multiple houses around the corner, it's entirely possible that that just adds to the story of 60 Duke Street as a property. However, just returning to the directories then, it's not until the year 1915 that we have a listing, and by this point the property has been transferred to Carl Schwann, and it is him who's actually listed here. I'm not sure if you can see him there, but he's listed as being in number 60. So we think that the house at Duke Street most likely dates from around the year 1915. In the 1920 directory, here he is, we have recorded as living there one Professor Theo Flynn, father of Errol. And we know that Errol lived in this house for a short time only, probably from around 1919 to 1920, and they most likely rented Duke Street and didn't own it. So interestingly, the directory records two people. You can see that number 60 has two people listed there. There was another man there who lived there at the same time as the Flynns called Eric W. James. And I'm going to look at him just a little bit more in just a moment, but it would be really interesting to know what relationship he had with the Flynns, if any at all, whether they both just rented. Which comes to a really interesting point, that if a person did not own property but rented it directly, or perhaps boarded or lived with their employee in service capacity, then the post office's directories such as these, and also the assessment and valuation rolls, which I'll come to in just a second, they are amongst some of the few records that reveal information about renters and people who didn't own the property. So they are really important in that regard. So really, you never know who you're going to find living at your place when you're doing your research. The beauty of the post office directories too is that it lists general government officials and their positions, and also trades and other different entries too. So when I searched the 1922 directory, because I wanted to find Walter Alderman, who you'll remember from the certificate of title, I found him listed as living at 60 Duke Street, but when I went in and I did a search, he came up twice, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. I'll go and see what the second entry is. And he came up as listed in the Defence Department section of the directory, and he's listed as being a Lieutenant Colonel. So what I did is I decided to put Walter Alderman's name into the names index, and I found that he had actually served in World War One. We have a picture of him from the Weekly Courier, so his picture came up in the names index, and so we have a picture of one of these inhabitants, other than Errol, of course, but this is really interesting in itself. And what's really interesting too about this is that it basically creates a network within this suburb, because we know that 60 Duke Street is quite close to where Walter would have worked up the road at Anglesea Barracks. So it creates this sort of network of understanding of how people might have moved around this suburb as well, which is really interesting. Now, the way in which these directories are arranged, and I'll just go back because this is a nice one. You can see how they're arranged according to intersecting streets. And this makes this resource even more fantastic. not just about the names, but actually the locations and how people, what the houses that are there in between various streets is extremely useful. You can use this information to verify that you have the correct house number and that you're looking at the right property. The earlier years of these directories are fantastic, as sometimes there's no street numbering at all, so they can be used to research the ownership on either side of the house that you want to trace and use these to identify it from year to year. Now, lastly, because I'm really out of time actually, the absolutely wonderful resource, last resource to talk about is the valuation and assessment rolls. These rolls were published in the Tasmanian Government Gazette up to 1960 and were formerly known as the Hobart Town Gazette and the Hobart Gazette as well. So what the rolls show is when a property first appears and gives the name of the occupant as well as the name of the owner. Street listings in rolls for Hobart and in Launceston for particular years up to 1950, and alphabetical occupiers listings for areas outside Hobart and Launceston. Assessment and valuation rolls are available online and can be accessed through a simple two-step process. On the left there we have the assessment roll index, which if you look, for my example here is 1916, it has particular page numbers, and then you use that page number to go to the page number for that particular year, 1916. There are multiple within the Gazette. It's a continuous numbering system. So the number 4, for instance, the one for June runs on to July as well. So there's a continuous numbering system, which makes it much easier to use. So I had a look for Duke Street, which is this example here. On the left is the index, on the right is the Gazette for Duke Street for 1916. And what you can see is at this point on the property it was occupied by Carl Schwann and also by a Susan Schwann. In 1916, the annual value of the house is put at £37. And I absolutely love this image of the street because you can just have a look and see the interesting things here. We have the Nimmo still at number 22 and who obviously lived there for a while. We have a lovely picture of Miss Nimmo. And we also have, for instance, stables between numbers 50 and 56. And what an absolutely fabulous resource this is. Lastly, sorry, I forgot that there was actually one more, is Trove. And arguably I've left the most important and useful thing for researching your house and home to the very end, and I should probably put this at the very start, but we have referred to it on several times. Those of you who have not used Trove before, your mind is going to be absolutely blown by the possibilities of this. So Tasmanian newspapers are on Trove up to 1954, starting in 1810, and you can search using the house, street, owner, occupier, business name, anything, brings up a range of things here. So the Duke Street example, for instance, I've just randomly put it in October 1920, which is roughly the same time that Errol Flynn was there and others. 2 men were fined because their cattle strayed along Duke Street and York Street, Sandy Bay. This is really difficult to imagine today, given how built up it is, but what a fabulous image to have there too. And I also found out more about, or we found out more about Eric James, that when he lived with the Flynns at 60 Duke Street, he's in the newspaper as having returned home in 1919 from the war, so he'd served there. So this helps put a picture of the comings and goings and life experiences of people who resided at this particular place. So to conclude then, how can we help you? Well, we offer a range of research services. Guides to records, which I mentioned, are absolutely invaluable resources. If you live in Hobart, come and visit us here in the reading room, order items to view in the history room. We have volunteers that provide services too that can help you. We also have phone calls and you can phone us, or we have a chat system too, and we also have a free research service where you can put in questions to do with things that require a little bit more research. So I will end there. I'm terribly sorry at how long that actually went, but I would like to end by thanking the State Library and Archive team for helping put this together, and we are here to answer any questions that you have now, and hopefully you're not too overwhelmed. I certainly need a drink of water, that's for sure.
Thank you very much to Ali from the State Library and Archive Service, thank you very much, and thank you to everyone that came to attend a really fabulous program of National Family History Month talks. Of course, it's the first time that we're using the webinar, so thank you to everyone that decided to register for the webinars, and hopefully if you needed any extra information from those PowerPoints, you will be able to see them on YouTube, I think later in September, maybe mid-September. All of the talks will be there. I do have some more copies of the guide for anyone that missed out. Okay, I've got it. And also there are some feedback cards if anyone would like to give some feedback. There is some material to browse. I've got 2 tables here, and if Ali would like to answer any questions, I can throw the mic out if anyone's got anything.
And I'd really love the team to help, because there might be some early questions.
Yep. Is there anyone that needs to ask a question while I've got the mic?
Or if you're more comfortable,
Or
you can come up as well.
I got the impression, especially when dealing with them, I got the impression when dealing with the land records that you stopped or started at 1862, which was the advent of the Torrens title. But there were records before that. Are these not terribly useful for finding?
They are, but I tell you what, my colleague spoke about them the other day, and I didn't want to repeat what she said, so I didn't really go into that.
They're not all farms, though.
No, but she also didn't talk about farms. She talked about generally the process about how you can go about using them for anywhere, really. Yeah.
The other thing that I could suggest to you when you're talking about 60 Duke Street is that sometimes you can discover in the earliest record of the land transaction that when it's first bought, it has a price. And when it changes hands, it has a different price, suggesting that the house was actually built. I mean, it was a significant change.
Absolutely,
And
yes.
Since that particular family you're looking at was only there maybe for a year, you might find, and he was a builder, you might find that in that circumstance, the price was significantly higher. They don't always come with prices.
No, true. But that's the beauty of the second page, is that they often do have that mortgage and that price there too. So
mortgages are thought because they're not always just for the cost of the land.
true. Yeah.
You may be using it to get some other money to do something with it.
Absolutely.
So, but it's a start.
Yeah. No, that's a really lovely point. Thank you.